Thanks so much. Thanks to the Center for the privilege of being here today. Is this as it should be? Yeah, I guess. After about 10 years of studying Palestinian politics, I'm starting a new project on how emigration from Lebanon shapes struggles for power and access to political and economic power inside Lebanon. And so far in this project, I've done about 5 months of field work and collected more documents than I've been able to look at so far. And I've been looking in this at a series of sub-questions. And one of these questions is this idea of competing for the diaspora, of how actors inside Lebanon look to the diaspora and compete over expatriates for money, for votes, and for bodies in the ongoing battle over demography. And as the chair noted, that's one project, and it's not actually what I'm going to talk about today. Instead, so thank you for that introduction, which is no longer relevant. But what I am going to talk about is actually inspired by the Arab revolutions that we've been seeing. And like Louise Kankar mentioned this morning, I do also see emigration and revolution as two sides of the same coin. So this project will help me look a little bit about how this coin has operated in the case of Lebanon. So these uprisings that we've been seeing have surprised the world with the speed and the force with which they've undermined seemingly stable regimes. But no less puzzling is how such regimes survived as long as they did. From opinion polls to conversations in coffee shops and living rooms, Arab publics have long voiced palpable discontent with their political leaders. And still, these leaders manage to hold on year after year. So what accounts for this paradoxical coexistence of pervasive grievance with political elites on the one hand, and relative stability in their grip on power, at least until now, on the other? A generation of scholars in political science and other disciplines have theorized a range of factors: repression, manipulated elections, co-optation of business and labor, entrenchment of single parties, et cetera, et cetera. While varied in their specifics, these works tended to share a single emphasis. Political systems survived due to the strategies that leaders deliberately pursued to achieve that end. I seek to take a different approach and shift attention from the purposeful manipulation of expressly political institutions and relationships to processes that occur at the society level. My aim is to explore how even seemingly apolitical phenomena can contribute to the persistence of power structures by diffusing potential challenges to the status quo. One such phenomena I propose is emigration. How does emigration shape domestic politics in migrants' countries of origin? Exploring this question offers a new angle on this issue of the visibility of diasporas. Here, the focus is not on diaspora as actors, but diaspora in its other meaning of the dispersion of people as a phenomena. Research on migration typically focuses on the effect of immigration in the countries where migrants settle, and we have much less knowledge about outmigration and its effects on those left behind, which comes to the fore in the case of Lebanon. With 150 years of migration to 5 continents, Lebanon is a country of emigration par excellence. As one person told me during my first of my 2 summers of fieldwork in Beirut, leaving the country is as Lebanese as apple pie is American. Nevertheless, studies of Lebanese emigration tend to focus on particular diaspora communities abroad and rarely mention politics back home, domestic politics in Lebanon. On the flip side, studies of Lebanese politics tend to focus on sectarianism and clientelism. After all, Lebanon has a famously weak state, a political system in which religious confessions are guaranteed representation, and in which political bosses, the famous or infamous zu'ama, maintain patron-client ties to their constituents. Analyses of this political status quo rarely mention the fact that emigration is a fundamental component of the fabric of Lebanese society and the Lebanese economy. So there we have it, emigration and domestic politics. If there is a link, it is often overlooked. So in the spirit of this panel on visibility, my hope is to bring it a bit more into the spotlight. But before moving on to that link, the nature of the link, it's necessary to review a bit the parameters of Lebanese emigration today. Now, as Lebanon has not taken a census since 1932, we don't have official demographic data, but there are a number of surveys and studies that paint a portrait that most leading scholars and demographers believe to be fairly credible about the view of Lebanese emigration today. So here are the basics. Estimates, Lebanese emigration. These are, again, estimates based on surveys, household surveys and other studies and so forth, that suggest that about 10 to 20% of Lebanese citizens, so these are Lebanese passport holders, live outside Lebanon. This is an estimate of, again, between 400,000 to 1 million Lebanese citizens. By the way, that estimates I've been told about the size of the Lebanese diaspora are about 6 million. So all the stories of 15 million in the diaspora, 12 million in Brazil alone, the demographers I talk to believe those are visions of grandeur of a small country. But this is about Lebanese citizens. This means another estimate that about 45% of Lebanese households have at least one family member who is an emigre or who left between the years of 1992 and 2007. About 1/3 of Lebanese residents have considered emigrating, and there's over a decade of opinion polling asking people, are you thinking about emigrating? Have you taken steps to emigrate? And consistently, it shows numbers of this sort, which show that in addition to the big numbers of people who actually have emigrated, many, many more Lebanese continually live thinking about that option and having it be an option on their mental radar screen. So what do we know about these emigrants? Trends. Emigration is overwhelmingly economically motivated. Again, this is what comes through in the opinion polls. We know that public debt in Lebanon is something like 171% of GDP. Unemployment is currently estimated at 12 to 14%, up to 20% for people under the age of 25. As one economist told me in Beirut, the Lebanese economy is clinically dead. Immigration is increasingly young. Since 1993, the average age of migration is 28. It's also increasingly educated. Some 30% of university-educated Lebanese live outside Lebanon. Again, these are all estimates. The percentage of youth with university degrees among immigrants is more than twice that of residents. And lastly, emigration is cross-sectarian. Since 1975, nearly equal percentages of Maronite, Sunni, and Shi'i communities emigrate. Remittances, estimated about 20% of Lebanese GDP, which puts it even higher than some other big remittance receivers in the region. As of 2004, the IMF ranked Lebanon as first in the world for remittances per capita. So emigration is clearly a big part of society, in that so many people emigrate or think about emigrating. It's a huge part of the economy. What's its effect on politics? Oops. Here I make the second disclaimer, is that I'm a political scientist, and we display things in boxes and arrows, so don't be afraid. But what I do is seek to try to explore how emigration might contribute to the persistence of political structures and practices. My purpose here is not to test this idea that emigration does contribute to resilience of the political system, but to outline its logic by exploring 5 mechanisms by which I believe it has this effect and plays this role. These are illustrated here, and I'll look at each in turn. So, mechanism 1. Emigration and remittances serve as something as a safety valve, relieving social, political, and economic discontent that might otherwise become a burden on political elites. In this sense, outmigration is like a leak in a pressure cooker. As in Turner's frontier thesis, it dissipates the potential instability of people's unmet aspirations. Now, these safety valve dynamics have long roots in the Lebanese context. An historian I interviewed asserted that it's been the case since the mid-1800s, when peasants experiencing hardship might have sustained greater challenges to feudal structures, but instead sought livelihoods overseas. This sapped agitation, or the potential of agitation for political transformation. Likewise, in the contemporary era, outmigration relieves Lebanon of job seekers that its small labor market cannot accommodate. This prevents, perhaps, the emergence of a population of unemployed persons, or at least limits the size of that, who might otherwise have greater demands on the state for job creation, social services, unemployment insurance, food subsidies, or other sorts of benefits that are often lacking. Remittances arguably serve a similar function, increasing the purchasing power of hundreds of thousands of Lebanese residents. As anyone who's experienced daily electricity cuts in Lebanon knows, governmental provision of public goods is minimal. Still, remittances help society get by, relying on itself and reducing its need to demand that the state do more. Indeed, for some, remittances make things pretty comfortable. As one person from South Lebanon told me, if you see someone who's rich, then you know he's got somebody outside. If he's poor, he doesn't. Or in the words of another, the diaspora is Lebanon's sugar daddy. Or, as one emigre from the Shuf expressed it to me, they, residents, see us, the diaspora, as an ATM machine. What does this mean for politics? As a banker told me, money from abroad gives people the luxury of complaining about politics without necessarily needing to do much. Mechanism 2. In the terminology of Albert Hirschman, emigration offers a kind of exit that reduces the imperative of voice or taking action for political change. So if the first mechanism, emigration as safety valve, tries to suggest why grievances with the political system might not get to be so bad in the first place, this mechanism suggests that even when there are grievances with the status quo, emigration offers a way of coping with it that is not necessarily about making change in society and politics. This is particularly the case among middle classes, many of whom live with the expectation of having the option of leaving if the economic, political, or security situation gets bad enough. This was a sentiment that I heard repeatedly during my interviews. People spoke of plans A, plans B, plan C, even plans D, where they would emigrate if things got bad enough and the time finally came that they needed to pack their bags. Stories abounded of the lengths to which people would go to obtain a second passport. Some even told me that failing to get a second passport for your children was no less than irresponsible parenting. This idea of emigration is always on the horizon. The point for politics is that the exit option lessens the urgency of investing in national politics or campaigns for reform. It does so whether people actually leave or whether they merely think that someday they might or could. As one woman from Tripoli told me, if we intended to stay, then maybe we would go out into the streets. But we can leave, so we're very apathetic. Mechanism 3. Emigration depletes the ranks, again, this is just a proposition, depletes the ranks of those best positioned to build institutions, push for reform, or bring new ideas and skills into public life. This is particularly the case, as I mentioned earlier, to the degree that migrants are increasingly young and educated. Who is it that leads revolutions? I don't know about the educated, but the young and those with aspirations that they feel aren't being met. So again and again, one finds Lebanese commentators lamenting that this demographic, the young and the educated, is precisely that which we would expect to lead demands for political reform or create a greater culture of accountability in public life. And if these are the ones who are most likely to leave, the young and the educated, those who have job opportunities, good job opportunities overseas, who is most likely to stay behind? Perhaps people who are struggling between jobs, so they might not have all that much time to be involved in campaigns for reform because they're struggling between jobs, or those who are jobless and thus most desperate to accept any sort of a favor from a political boss or a zaim or a wasta, which leaves them arguably structurally positioned to be followers of established interests rather than challengers to the system. Mechanism 4. This is a pattern which seems to recur in Lebanese politics. Migrants who make great fortunes abroad and then return and become engaged in Lebanon in conventional, patron-based ways of doing politics. It seems that some wealthy returnees feel that money is not sufficient when they come back home for social honor. Instead, wish to consecrate their wealth with that unique kind of honor and prestige that comes with public office. So historically, there's been this pattern of existing political elites on the ground offering to these wealthy emigre returnees a place on their parliamentary electoral list in exchange for financial support. In this way, as one person put it to me, emigres have been literally buying their way into politics for decades. Arguably, this injection of migrant money helps buttress and reinforce clientelism and vote buying and so forth as an aspect of politics in Lebanon. Finally, this mechanism of number 5. Emigration may help detach one's commitment to homeland from commitment to the state. That is, it facilitates a certain depoliticization of nationalism. This isn't unique in the Lebanese context, but I'll describe it here. As one woman told me in Beirut, people love Lebanon, but they have a real lack of faith in Lebanon as a political entity. Now, observers typically attribute this to the weakness of the state and the strength of attachments to family, to village, to particular localities, and perhaps also to sect. But overlooked is how emigration might also reinforce the same tendency. After all, it allows people to love Lebanon, to have a nostalgic love for the homeland, without being subject to the less satisfactory elements of its political status quo. So here, echoing ideas that I heard throughout my trips, are the words of one man from Mount Lebanon who told me, "My friends who've left just come back here for vacations. The country has become a summer home for them. Lebanon bayt sayfi ilhom. They ask nothing from the Lebanese government, and they want nothing to do with Lebanese politics. They come back for the sea, the food, the memories, and their extended families. They say, to hell with the system, and establish their own parallel system at the individual level that is an exit from the system of Lebanon as a collective." So to conclude, I'll leave you with 2 quotations. The first from the great Lebanese thinker Michel Chiha, saying about Lebanon, "We would not be able to live without emigration," which I don't know if it's a direct reference to remittances, but we can think of it in that term as well as the broader sense of what emigration means to the Lebanese. And the second is a recapture of a conversation I had with a cab driver in Beirut, which is how most people's ethnography happens, right, talking to cab drivers, in which he says to me, "The politicians are all thieves." And me, taking notes, says, "But don't people vote for the politicians?" And he says, "Yeah, but the people are all donkeys." To which I say, "But aren't there many Lebanese with a high level of education?" And to which he says, "The educated people all leave." So that's not the full story, but it's part of it. So to sum up then, exploring the effects of emigration on politics in the sending country offers new insight into the question of how a political system can endure despite pervasive dissatisfaction. I've discussed this logic and the logic of this proposition in Lebanon, but it surely applies elsewhere in the Arab world and beyond. But of course, for every story, there's a counter-story. While I've outlined the logic by which emigration contributes to political resilience and perhaps slows imperatives for political change, I'm also thinking about the conditions under which the opposite might be true. Perhaps it's when a society and nation becomes used to emigration as that safety valve, and then that safety valve begins to shrink. Perhaps there are other ways in which emigration and reverberating back through return migration or remittances changes social structure, changes economic access, and so forth, and leads to new imbalances and changes within the nation in the homeland. Or, as Simon just showed, and Amal Ghazal as well this morning, certainly diasporas can also be agents of nationalist mobilization and political campaigns. So the next questions to explore are, does emigration necessarily help in sustaining a political status quo? Or under what conditions might it instead contribute to undermining that political system or even transforming it? Thank you.